I always pull out the nib and feed on my friction fit pens every time I clean them. This includes a Pilot Metropolitan, Pilot Falcon, Platinum 3776 Century, Lamy Safari and Al-Star, TWSBI 580, and a Vac Mini, and a Jinhao 159. I'm wondering, does the fit of a friction fit nib and feed wear down with repeated extractions? Is this kind of deep clean something I should limit to only every once in a while as opposed to every time I empty a pen? So this is a really good question because there are some pens, I'll use the Edison ones as an example here. I don't think that's one of the ones you listed off there, but if I'm cleaning it, I can pull the nib and feed. Ooh, I actually need to clean this one. How about that? But you can, I'm getting ink on my fingers. That's all right. Now I know I've had a good day. You can pull the nib and feed out, and yes, theoretically, every time you're pulling the nib and feed out, you're potentially causing some wear and tear. It's just like anything else, anything mechanical, anything physical that moves or changes or shifts over time will eventually wear down. I personally pull nibs and feeds out of my pens all the time. There's a lot of pens I have where I'll pull the nib and feed out every time I clean them. Especially something like a Metropolitan. It's an inexpensive pen in the grand scheme of things. If I shorten the lifespan of my Metropolitan by a year or so off of the 20 years or 50 years I might be using this pen, I'm not that worried about it. I view that as a good trade-off for the convenience of cleaning it out quicker. But that's me personally. So if you were to ask any pen manufacturer, they're going to say, you really shouldn't pull the nib and feed out of your pen because that voids warranty or blah, 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 mainly because they don't know what you're going to do to it and they don't want to be held liable for any damage you could cause in the process of extraction. I personally think that the potential for damaging it or losing it or doing something to it in the process of extraction or retraction, putting it back in, is actually greater than the little bit of wear and tear you'll get from actually pulling the nib and feed out all the time. Because, it's friction fit and, theoretically, if it's, say it's plastic feed, plastic grip, whatever, yes, theoretically it could, wear down over time or something like that. I personally have never worn out a pen of mine from constantly doing that. But then again, I have a lot of pens, so maybe if you were to use one pen and clean it and take it out every single time over a number of years, it could cause some damage to it, and you kind of have to accept that risk if you're doing it. Again, it comes all to that trade-off of, is it worth it saving the time? If you have something like an Edison or something like that, you can actually replace the whole nib unit housing for 25 bucks, and the rest of the pen will be fine over time. So it might be worth it to you to make it easier to clean if perhaps 8 years from now you have to replace a nib unit because you've caused wear on it. It's all just, it depends on your style, depends on how you're doing it and stuff like that. Some pens, like the TWSBI ones, the feeds are a little more fragile, like the fins are more flexible on that one, so you could potentially cause some more damage with that one. The Jinhaos, I really wouldn't sweat it at all, they're so inexpensive. Lamy Safari and Al-Star, I have heard of some people that their nib doesn't fit quite the same because the wings on the feed on the Lamy Safari is a little more fragile than some of these other feed systems that you've mentioned. So that one I might be, just kind of aware could happen. They don't sell replacement feeds either, so it's a little more difficult to get those replaced. Again, they're not a super expensive pen, so if over years it happens, it's not the end of the world, but still. So I would say the Lamys, I would definitely try not to take the feeds out that often because the feeds are not super easy to get out, and to get them back in, if you do it wrong, you can completely damage your feed. So you have to know exactly how to get it back in there. The nib, if the nib ends up getting a little bit loose, you can actually bend the wings on the nib a little bit to fit it back on there tight. But again, if you do it wrong, you could cause some damage on it. So that's the only one where I'm kind of like, I wouldn't mess with that too much. And then the Falcon, it's interesting you mentioned that because I don't know a lot of people that typically remove the Falcon nib and feed. That one's a little more difficult to do, especially the first time, partly because of the design. It doesn't have like, big fins on it. It's just got like a little smooth section on the grip or on the feed. It's hard to grab. You can definitely pull it out if you're intentional about it, but that one, I may just kind of throw some caution out a little bit too. It's more potential to damage that one. 3776 Century, you're pretty good. That one's relatively easy to remove these days. The old version of the 3776 is not as easy to remove. The Century versions though, since they changed over to that 3-4 years ago, something like that, they're pretty good now, so I wouldn't sweat that one too much. But yeah, I would say, there's definitely some pens that they even put like explicit things, like the Pilot Custom 823. You can remove the nib and feed on that one, but they say explicitly on there, do not do that for warranty purposes. So keep that in mind. Anything that you're doing like this, you're basically voiding the warranty if you pull out the nib and the feed. If there's any damage that's caused, they're going to say, well, you did something to it. How can we say it's our defect and not something you did? Which there's a point to that. So just keep that in mind, especially in these more expensive pens. You get into the Falcon and the Centuries and stuff like that. Keep in mind that you're keeping that that responsibility on yourself whenever you start pulling your pen apart. It's up to you whether you want to do that or not. I don't know that you have to do that every time you clean a pen, especially if you're going to be inking it up with the same color or a very similar color. You know, like I have certain pens where I always ink it up with blue, and that's just all that ever goes in there. So I'll clean it, but I don't, beat myself up about cleaning it all the way through every single time I clean the pen. Sometimes you just need to flush it out a bit and then you ink it back up and it's good to go. That's the nice thing about fountain pen ink, is it's water-based. So if there's a little bit of something left in there, if you know that it's a conventional ink and it's not something like Bay State Blue where if it mixes with a regular ink it can cause some issues. If you know it's just conventional ink going to another conventional ink, you don't have to completely take the thing apart and clean it all out like showroom condition, before you ink it up with something else. You can do a little lazier clean in between if it's going to be the same color or something similar. So you definitely don't need to clean every time, but you may prefer to do that. And I think I pretty much exhausted everything I know about that question. So hopefully that helps you out.